11:02, and we're expecting a few more people, but we'll just let them in as they enter the lobby. So let's get going because there's a lot to get through. So hello and welcome everybody. Hope you had a good weekend, and welcome to this first Inclusion in Sport Learning Series webinar, which is really exciting. I'm off camera just because my internet is not great, so apologies for that. But I'm just going to do a very quick introduction and then hand over to Olivia, who's going to run the workshop. So, yeah, my name's Adrian Ledbury from the Heart Sport and Physical Activity Partnership. I'm part of our EDI steering group, which is driving and leading and designing all our work around EDI across our business, HSP. And like most people in the room, EDI is at the heart of what we do. It's really central. We're trying to get more people involved in sport and physical activity, and particularly those people who are inactive, and to reduce the inequalities that exist between those who are most active and least active. So it's really important that we take time to understand the inclusion issues that are key and topical and are affecting us within sport and physical activity. So we've teamed up with Inclusive Employers, and Inclusive Employers have got a specialist sport inclusion team, of which Olivia is part, to design this Inclusion in Sport Learning Series, of which there are 10 different workshops. There's going to be one per month between now and April 2025. So this is the first one. They're bite-sized webinars. They're designed to introduce the topic and really empower colleagues to adopt more inclusive approaches, develop your confidence and competence. And therefore, all our partners, providers, coaches, instructors, they're for anybody who might benefit from having more knowledge of the particular subject. So just in terms of housekeeping, we want to make these sessions really interactive. So if you've got any questions, if you've got any learning yourself, if you want to share anything, please use the chat or the Q&A. And from time to time throughout the session, we'll have a pause and we'll pick out those questions and those observations, and also open up if people want to come off mute to get involved. We've also planned in some breakout rooms at the end, and this will allow you to reflect on what you've learned so far, again, to share your learnings and your experience in this particular subject. So that'll come towards the end. We will be recording the session, and we will be sending out the recording and the slides afterwards for all those people who've registered. We'll also let you know about the next session and the future sessions that are planned throughout the year. So hopefully that gives you a good context. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the webinar today. And I'm going to hand over to Olivia Banton, who's a Senior Inclusion and Diversity Consultant with Inclusive Employers. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Adrian. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. We really appreciate the fact that you're invested in EDI. So today we're going to be talking about LGBT inclusion in sport and physical activity. So a few housekeeping things. Adrian's run through a lot of these already, so I won't spend too much time on them. So please ensure that your microphones are turned off, just so that there aren't any disruptions. We want this to be a really interactive session, so we really encourage you to ask questions, to participate in discussions. You can use the chat function for that. You're also welcome to come off mute if you feel more comfortable speaking that way. Please do say hi. Let me know who you are, where you're connecting from. You can put that in the chat. If you have any connection issues, as often happens when we've got quite a few people on the call, that's absolutely fine. You're welcome to jump off and jump back on again. Not going to be judged for that. And as Adrian said, the session is being recorded. So Today we will cover quite a few things. We'll first talk about the kind of relevant terminology when it comes to LGBT inclusion. Then we're going to look at the value of sport and physical activity for the LGBT community. Then I'm going to show you some LGBT role models in sport. Then we're going to look at the barriers that persist for the LGBT community when it comes to sport and physical activity. And finally, we're going to talk about some top tips for creating environments that are inclusive of and for LGBT communities. So first of all, I want you to watch this very quick video, and this just kind of highlights the value of inclusion, particularly LGBT inclusion within sport and physical activity. I've just seen we've got some people saying hello in the chat. So hi everyone, it is lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for joining us. Did anyone have any thoughts on the video before we jump into language and terminology, specifically around kind of the community element of sport and how that's a value to people from the LGBT community? You're welcome to come off mute if you'd feel more comfortable talking that way. So if you want to drop your messages in the chat, that's absolutely fine. But let's move on to language and terminology. So I'm just going to run you through some kind of key definitions that you'll probably hear throughout different parts of the webinar. So gay and lesbian. So lesbian usually refers to a woman who has a romantic or sexual attraction towards women. Some non-binary people also identify with this term. We'll go on to what non-binary means in the next slide. Someone who's gay is someone who has a romantic or sexual attraction to someone of the same gender. This usually references men, but can also be used by other genders as well. Someone who's bisexual has a romantic or sexual attraction to more than one gender. Someone who is trans or transgender. So this is an umbrella term. It's used to describe people who have a gender identity that is different from the sex that they were assigned at birth. And finally, queer. This is another kind of umbrella term for people who are not either heterosexual or cisgender. You may have heard the word intersex. So this is quite a general term. It's used to describe a variety of conditions in which a person is born with a reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't seem to fit the kind of typical definitions of male or female. Someone who is cis or cisgender is someone whose gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth. Alternatively, it can be used to describe people who are not transgender. Someone who's asexual is someone who does not experience sexual attraction to anyone. Someone who's aromantic doesn't experience romantic attraction. And finally, non-binary. So this is an umbrella term used to describe gender identities where someone doesn't identify exclusively as a man or a woman. They may regard themselves as neither exclusively a man or a woman. They could regard themselves as both, or they might take a completely different approach to gender. So I think this is just kind of helpful context because you hear a lot of these words come up throughout the session. So it's just good to understand a bit more about what they mean. Have you heard of any other terms? Is there anything that you can think of that I maybe haven't covered within those definitions? Again, you're welcome to put your thoughts in the chat, or if you want to be brave and come off mute, then please do so.
Just thought I'd mention, Olivia, attendees aren't able to unmute themselves, but they are able to put their hands up. So if they want to put their hands up, then I am able to unmute them on their behalf.
Brilliant. Thank you for letting me know that, Charlotte.
Oh, I'll unmute you, Abby. Allow mic. Okay, you might be able to unmute yourself now that I've allowed it.
Thank you so much. I'm really sorry. I'm not actually contributing to this question. For some reason, I can't interact with the chat. I can see lots of other people can, but I'm desperately trying to type and say hi, but can't.
I'll have a little look and see if I can work out the tech behind that at all, Abby.
Meanwhile, I'll think of something to say in answer to the question. I'll pop my hand down.
You're all good. Thank you for letting us know. If it might be worth other people putting their hands up if they're having the same issue. Just so that we. Matt, is that a chat issue or is that a any other terms?
I'll take it it's a chat issue. I won't unmute everyone. I'll just have a little look and see if I can sort out the chat, guys. Thanks for letting me know. Oh, Rick, I know was in the chat earlier, so I will allow Rick's mic.
Thank you.
Take it away, Rick.
Morning, Olivia. Yeah, I remember going to a venue where they listed lots of genders that I wasn't that familiar with, and I remember seeing things like androgynous and pangender, as a couple of other terms that I wasn't overly familiar with.
Excuse me, that's really interesting. So do you remember or did you ask about like the definition of things like androgynous, for example?
No, it was just an online sign up for the bar ticket at the time, and it really had quite a good in-depth list of. So I remember those two in particular. I remember a few others as well, like two-spirit and things like that. And I just remember thinking that there's a lot here. Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely something that's quite complex. So pansexual, for example, is someone who has either kind of a sexual or romantic attraction towards people of all genders. So it's more based on they almost refer to themselves as kind of gender blind. So gender and sex are not the determining factors in attraction. It's more about the person. But yeah, pansexual, that's a very good example. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone else have any thoughts, any other terms that you've heard? No, in that case, we have another hand up. Go back a slide. We have Nikki.
Sorry, that was
I've
an error.
enabled your. That's it.
Sorry, that
No
was an
worries,
error. I was
Nikki.
trying to do the chat and I kept pressing the wrong button. I'm sorry, Olivia.
No worries. No worries at all. Okay, so let's move on then to why sport and physical activity is good for LGBT communities. So we have another video here. Content warning, there is some homophobic language within the video. So if that is something that would make you uncomfortable, you're more than welcome to go grab a coffee or otherwise disengage from the video. That is absolutely fine. So we're now going to talk a little bit about the value of sport sort of for the LGBT community. And we have a quiz. So hopefully this will be kind of a fun way of testing your knowledge. So the first question is, what percentage of LGBT Britons say they experienced or were diagnosed with a mental health condition over the last 12 months? So the first option is 33%, the second option is 46%, and the third is 51%. So what do people think? Okay, we have 51, we've got 51. Interesting. Okay, there's quite a good consensus here. We all think it's probably 51. I'll give you a few more seconds. We have a 46. Got another 46. Very interesting. So people tend to think it's somewhere along the kind of higher end of the percentages. Give you a few more seconds just in case anyone else wants to share their thoughts. 51. Okay, nobody's gone for 33%. So you're all along the right lines. Correct answer is 51%. So this was a YouGov poll, and it surveyed quite a significant amount of people. What was interesting was that relative to the general population, the number of, or the percentage of LGBT Britons who experience or diagnosed with a mental health problem was quite a lot higher. So it suggests that, there are certain factors that, coming into play. There's bias, there's prejudice, and this all has a very negative impact on people from the LGBT community, which is why fostering inclusion within sport and physical activity is so important. So second question, and this is more around kind of that community element. So what percentage of young people experiencing homelessness in the UK do you think identify as LGBT? First option is 11%, second is 24%, third is 32%. So we've got 24%, we've got 32%, 24%. Okay, we've got a bit more of a variety on this one. 24%. Okay, the consensus is seeming to be 24%. I'll give you another minute just to, in case anyone else wants to share their thoughts. Okay, so it's looking like 24% is the go-to answer, or the most common answer. And you are correct. So 24% of young people experiencing homelessness in the UK identify as LGBT. And I guess the point of this slide is just to communicate that, there are quite, like, just the extent of the challenges that are faced by people within this community, not only within sport and physical activity, but also in all areas of life. Okay, so our final question, I'm not sure why it's doing it like this, is around acceptance. So what percentage of transgender youth whose pronouns were not affirmed attempted suicide in the past year? Do we think it's 17%, 28%, or 35%? Got some 28, 35, 28, 35, 28. Okay, the consensus seems to be, again, towards the higher end in terms of the percentages. 35. So the correct answer is 28%. So 28% of transgender youth whose pronouns were not affirmed attempted suicide in the past year. This is a deeply sad statistic, but I think it's important to know, and it's important to realise just how much of an impact things that can seem relatively small will have on a person. People's gender identity is something that is so integral to who they are as a person. And when that's not affirmed, that has very far-reaching consequences. Also, I don't want to say the inverse is true, but the number decreased to 12% for those whose pronouns were affirmed by almost the people in their lives. And I think what's important to take away is that this is very so trying to make sure that you do use inclusive language, gender affirming language that is in line with the way other people see themselves, that can really make a big difference to somebody. So again, this slide is just a bit more about the kind of benefits for LGBT youth in terms of sport and physical activity. So transgender and non-binary students at schools which have inclusive policies were less likely to skip school. They were also less likely to experience victimization or harassment. Similarly, transgender and non-binary athletes had higher grades than those who did not participate in sports. And LGBT athletes reported 20% lower rates of depressive symptoms. So taken together, what this shows is inclusion leads to better outcomes for you know, the LGBT community. When people are treated well, they tend to perform better, they tend to be happier, you know, they show up, they feel better. Excuse me. So why is LGBT inclusion good for sports and physical activity? So we've talked about why LGBT, why inclusion is, so why, yeah, sorry, I'm fumbling my words a bit. So the impact of performance on psychological safety. Essentially, when you provide an inclusive environment, people tend to perform better. So creating an environment that's flexible and that's safe for everyone to be themselves will benefit everybody. So if you break down those harmful gender stereotypes about masculinity and femininity, if you break down assumptions about who people's partners are, and you create an environment where people feel safe, they will perform better. So Tom Bosworth is a good example of this. Tom Bosworth is a British two-time Olympic race walker. So he holds 3 world bests, including the world best for the 1 mile race walk. He also holds 6 British records. He won, I think, 13 British Championship gold medals, a silver Commonwealth Games medal, and is also a World European Olympic Games finalist. So when thinking about what leaders in sport should do to improve things, Tom talks about kind of encouraging environments and platforms to be more accessible, to educate people around the power of language and the impact it can have. So he said, I think that message can be relevant from the very top of elite sport all the way down to grassroots. So, sorry. One of the ways that you can facilitate inclusion is through the use of inclusive policies. So this is quite a, I say it's a good case study, that's maybe not the best language to use, but it's a good opportunity for case studies on the impact of trans exclusion and inclusion, because within the United States, the policies vary so much. So in states with inclusive policies, they found that high school girls' participation in sports remained largely unchanged between 2011 and 2019. In states with exclusive policies, girls' participation has decreased. In California and Connecticut, which have the most inclusive policies, girls' sports participation has increased, including by almost 14% in California. When you think about it, this isn't that surprising. So where gender testing is instituted, there is the increased risk of gender policing, and young athletes have to go through extremely invasive testing procedures, which would naturally disincline them to want to participate in sport and physical activity if that's what they felt that they had to go through in order to participate. So this House bill is, I believe, from Ohio, and it's called the Save Women's Sport Act. It says if a participant's sex is disputed, she must verify her sex with a physician in only the following ways. So an exam of her internal and external reproductive anatomy. They look at her normal endogenously produced levels of testosterone, or they analyze her genetic makeup. And I think one thing that's important to consider is how this is something that is very targeted towards, you know, trans individuals. The same doesn't apply for athletes who may have other kind of advantages. It's something that's very specific to gender, and you know, it's quite transphobic, to be completely honest. So this slide shows the number of Olympians who were openly gay at the each of the Olympic Games. So the London Olympic Games, there were 23 athletes who were openly part of the LGBT community. That number increased to 56 in Rio in 2016. And in Tokyo, the number rose to 185. So this generally is positive. It means that kind of times are changing. It means that people are, in theory, they feel more comfortable to, to be themselves and to communicate who they are quite openly. But I think it's also important to recognize that LGBT inclusion opens up your pool of talent. There are lots of very good athletes who may have not felt comfortable being themselves within sport. That does seem to be changing, but it is important to continue to push forward to that end. Also, in terms of data from Paralympic athletes, the data is less robust. However, figures indicate around 23 athletes in the 2020 Olympic Games identified as belonging to the LGBT community. So now we're going to look at some LGBT role models. So this is Quinn. So in 2021, at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, Quinn became the first out transgender non-binary athlete to compete at the Olympics, the first to medal, and also the first to earn a gold medal. Renee Richards is another example. So in August of 1976, the United States Tennis Association barred transgender athlete Renee Richards from competing in the US Open women's program. They stated that she must pass a chromosomal test, which Richard failed. She then went on to sue the USTA and win the right to compete a year later via a New York Supreme Court ruling. Michael Gunning is another example of an athlete who is openly part of the LGBT community. So he is an international competitive swimmer. He's best known for participating in the 200-meter butterfly event. He holds dual Jamaican and British citizenship and is the current national record holder for the 200-meter butterfly and the 200 and 400-meter freestyle. He said, "I now want to make sport more equal for all. I want to encourage Black people to swim. I want to help change homophobic laws around the world. I want to make an impact." So one thing I want to highlight from what he says is the idea of intersectionality. So he talks not only about homophobia, but he also talks about his racial identity. So something we're going to talk about a bit later on in the session is the idea of intersectionality. So intersectionality is the idea that people have lots of different aspects of their identity and they interact with one another. So take me as an example. I am a woman. I have dual heritage. I am part of the LGBT community, but those different aspects will impact things like how I'm treated, how much privilege I have within certain contexts. So I guess it's important to acknowledge that the experiences of, for example, a Black trans athlete might be very different to the experiences of a white trans athlete. So Jake Daniels, so at age 27, he became the UK's first male professional footballer to come out publicly as gay since Justin Fashanu in 1990. So what's interesting is, so in contrast to Fashanu's experience, Daniel experienced a wave of support from media, from teammates, and from fans. So he said, when I did tell them, they all started clapping and telling me how proud they were of me. As a team, we have always we always have to be together and have that bond, and it actually brought everyone closer together. for me to actually fit in with the team as myself. It was just so amazing for me to be able to do that. And again, I think this is a sign that things are going in the right direction. Things are changing positively over time. And I guess he must have had the opportunity to feel psychologically more safe within his team, both in order to come out in the first place, but also in terms of the way that they responded to him. So that's really positive. So what are some of the barriers to LGBT inclusion? Excuse me. So I think the key point of this slide is that to some extent, culture in sports is a reflection of the culture that we have within society. So as I'll read some of the statistics, for example, so 80% of participants have witnessed or experienced homophobia in sport, with homophobic language being the most common. 78% of people believe an openly gay person would not be very safe as a spectator at a sporting event. The most likely location of homophobia is spectator stands, followed by school PE classes. So I think this is something to be very mindful of. This is why I mentioned earlier about kind of sports being a reflection of society, but also the fact that these kind of biases and this kind of behavior starts quite young. So it's important, you know, at every point to make sure that, you know, you address biases and homophobic language and things like that, so that it doesn't then become a problem as people get older and as people kind of move into, you know, professional sports. So most gay people play team sports, but 73% believe youth team sport is not safe for gay people. And 81% of gay men and 74% of lesbians are completely or partially in the closet while playing youth sport. Many of them fear discrimination from players or from officials. So this slide shows sexual orientation laws around the world, so where it's illegal to be part of the LGBT community. So as I'm sure you're all aware, it is legal in the UK, but it's important to think about you know, the relationships and connections with the rest of the world, you know, international competitions, for example, training camps. So I guess some of the highlights or the key points to take from this slide is same-sex sexual activity is a crime in 70 countries. It receives a death penalty in 9 of those countries. It was a crime in the UK until 1967, when it was partially decriminalised. Prior to the 2003 Supreme Court ruling in Lawrence versus Texas, same-sex sexual activity was illegal in 14 US states, Puerto Rico, and the US military. So by that time, 29 states, the District of Columbia, and 5 territories had repealed their state sodomy laws by legislative action. So this slide shows which countries require a mental health diagnosis before a trans person can change their documents. So as you can see, it's more countries than not. One of the things that's quite problematic with this is it essentially means you have to it treats transness as a mental illness. So one of the pieces of language which wasn't on the language slide, but I think it's important to understand, is something called gender dysphoria. So if you are trans and you want to change your documents, you have to get a diagnosis of what's called gender dysphoria. And that suggests that there is a fundamental mismatch between the way you feel in your body and the way you feel in your mind. But this is incredibly stigmatizing for people within the trans community. One of the things that, or one of the kind of more progressive takes is something called gender, I'm trying to remember the word now. Excuse me. So gender euphoria, that's the word. So this is the comfort or joy an individual feels when thinking about or expressing their true identity. And a lot of sort of LGBT advocates are looking for that to become a more key part of kind of identifying with being trans and becoming a way of getting your documents changed, because what you don't want to say is that somebody's mentally ill, which is essentially what the gender dysphoria diagnosis implies. And again, that's incredibly stigmatizing. I've just seen
sorry, no, Olivia, Abby's asked a question in the chat, and it's fine if you want to wait until the end, but I just thought I'd flag it in case it was convenient to answer Abby's question.
Are there any comparable stats for LGBTQ experiences from the UK? I don't have them on me, but I'm more than happy to send them over with the slide deck. I can add them to the slides and then I can send them out after the session. But that's a really good question. Thank you so much for that, Abby. Okay, so excuse me. This slide is it shows some major sporting events in the last 10 years that have been hosted in countries with anti-LGBT law, legislation or culture. So hockey fives, there were back-to-back World Cups. So I think one thing that it would be good to kind of think about is what is the potential impact of hosting major sporting events in countries which quite openly do not support the LGBT community. So for those of you for whom the chat function is working, it'd be great if you could share some thoughts on that. If you want to come off mute, that would also be great. But what do you think would be the impact of this, particularly for people who belong to the LGBT community? You could think about it through the lens of, for example, mental health. Think about it through the lens of performance. How well are people going to perform if they don't feel safe in the environment in which they're competing? So yeah, if anyone has any thoughts, please do share those. Got a hand up from Abby.
I mean, yeah, the obvious thought for me is a person going into a country not being able to be their authentic self. I mean, it came up in one of the quotes earlier, just talking about the energy that's going to sap from and drain from a person at a time where they're going to be expected to perform also. I can't imagine that impact. And also knowingly inserting yourself into what could be a hostile environment. I mean, it's not going to be a positive experience, and that's very much at the lesser end of the scale. It could be a lot worse than that. So yeah, absolutely.
I think you've raised several really good points there. On the kind of mental health side of things, people are going to feel very anxious. People are going to feel unsafe, and that's going to have a knock-on effect on how well they perform. Excuse me, and the way that maybe they engage with other people. If you don't feel safe, you might become more withdrawn. There are so many sort of negative implications. So yeah, thank you for sharing. In the chat from Stephen, we have fear, rejection, low self-worth, and not feeling valued. That's a really important point, actually, because you hear it a lot in conversations about the workplace and management. The more people feel valued, again, the better they perform, the more enthusiastic they are about their work. if you don't feel valued, you're going to be less motivated, you're going to be disinclined to do well. So thank you for sharing that, Stephen. We've got a comment from Matt as well. So I remember as a bisexual male during Qatar 2022, there were discussions around rainbow armbands in the England team. That would have been great to see England stand up for my rights. But when FIFA and others challenged that and England backed down, it disillusioned me from football during that time. They put profit and performance over making me feel safe. Thank you so much for sharing that, Matt. That is, I appreciate you being so forthcoming with your own personal experience. I can only imagine how disappointing and disillusioning that must have been for you, and I'm sure you're not the only person who has had that experience. But it's also something that, you know, I think needs to be considered, right? It's not the impact of not openly supporting the LGBT community is huge. It disinclines people from wanting to participate in sport, and to be honest, it probably also disinclines people from watching sport. So thank you very much again for sharing. More athletes are not willing to or wanting to go to countries that don't accept them based on their sexuality. That's a very good point. Some athletes may feel pressured to go based on sponsorship or potential loss of earnings. Absolutely. So with the Hockey Fives, I think Great Britain hockey chose not to go on the basis of not feeling safe. So again, it excludes whole teams from from being able to participate. So that's a really good point. It must be quite crushing to work so hard in your sporting field to then have to participate in a country that doesn't accept you for who you are when you have put your life and soul into being the best you can in your field. Absolutely. I think sport is one of those areas where it is often people's, if it's not their whole life, it's a huge part of their life. People train for years to get to, you know, particularly the higher levels of sport, and to then have to go and compete in an environment where you don't feel safe is, I think, crushing is a good word. So thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this slide? This has been a really, really good discussion, by the way. So thank you so much for all of your contributions. So I think everyone's covered kind of the main points, at least from my perspective, on this slide. I think one of the things that is worth considering is how to make people feel safe within those environments. So it's often very difficult for many reasons to not attend. So if you're an Olympic athlete, you're unlikely to, you know, to not go to the Olympics. That's going to be the pinnacle of your sporting career. So when you're in a situation where it's kind of unavoidable, you know, to be in an environment that is, you know, doesn't necessarily support LGBT people, it's worth considering how you can make people feel safe and what you can do to support athletes. So that's something we're going to talk about a little bit later on. So some of the barriers in terms of LGBT inclusion, global inequalities is a big one. Culture. So the culture reflects the society around us. So we see the same biases and assumptions. However, there's also a great opportunity to create an environment where these biases and assumptions are addressed and people are protected. Things like homophobia, biphobia, acephobia, and transphobia. So I'm sure you're all aware of what homophobia is. Biphobia is the idea that, so there's a lot of prejudice against bi people because they're not accepted into kind of queer spaces or straight spaces. A lot of people do deny the existence of bi people. You hear a lot of things like, oh, you're just fussy, or you haven't picked, or things like that. So acephobia is the idea that, well, everyone must want to date someone, and so anyone who doesn't kind of doesn't fit that sort of normal narrative. And transphobia is something that, you know, that's a massive issue. There's been a huge rise in kind of violence against trans people. Excuse me. And a lot of this prejudice is based on heteronormative assumptions. So if everyone assumes your partner is of a different gender, it means you feel like you're hiding something unless you do come out. I'm just checking the chat very quickly. We've got some comments. So in Euro 2020, Ronaldo publicly removed a Coca-Cola bottle from in front of him during a press conference and replaced it with water. After that, Coca-Cola shares tanked. Imagine if a sports person did a similar display in one of these, excuse me, promoting LGBT iconography, and the story that would generate. That is a great comment. I think one thing that is important to consider, especially if you are, you know, a very successful athlete, is how much impact you can have for a relatively small gesture. So that's a really great point. Thank you, Matt. The next point in terms of barriers is around facilities. So things like changing rooms and toilets. Do you have baby changing facilities for all genders? Do you have gender neutral toilets? And again, these all seem like maybe quite small things, but for the people who are on the receiving end of that, you know, it can make a whole world of difference. It can make them feel psychologically safe. It can make them feel physically safe. They're really important to consider. Kit is another one. I remember seeing recently, I think it was Nike brought out some new kit designs, and the one for, this is a male one, which is quite standard. The woman's kit was quite I'll say revealing. It was just inappropriate, to be completely honest. It was not good at all. I'm really not sure how that got past the design stage, but anyway, so things like tight kit or very gendered kit can be alienating for people who are maybe gender non-conforming. It can also encourage body image issues. So if you are asking people to wear something which is, you know, very tight, it can make them feel kind of sexualized, which is obviously not how people want to feel. And again, that could impact their performance, because they're not going to feel comfortable with what, you know, with the way they look. You know, they feel like they're on display. So kit's something that's really important to consider. Access to support. So not, especially in countries where there are quite, you know, strict laws against, you know, being part of the LGBT community, it's unlikely that you're going to find communities or safe spaces. But that support is so vital to consider. Again, gender segregation is a big one. Excuse me. And a lack of understanding around intersectional identity. So again, intersectionality is the idea that there are layers of identity, lots of different things that make up who you are as a person, and they will impact your experiences and the way you're treated. So sports organizations tend to kind of silo people. This means that people won't necessarily find inclusive spaces that support all aspects of their identity. So LGBT spaces may not have considered how they might be anti-racist or how they can be accessible. Does anyone have any thoughts on any barriers that maybe I've missed here or not covered in some way? Please do share in the chat if you think there's anything that should be on this slide that isn't currently. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide, and if anyone wants to share some ideas, I can always come back to that. So this was last year. It was a USA versus Mexico game, which was cut short by the referee after some fans made some homophobic chants. I think the key thing that I want you to take from this slide is, for example, if you're in a local club environment and you hear banter, it's important to address this. Everyone has a role to play in addressing homophobia, and I do think that the impact of spectators is not to be underestimated at all. So excuse me. I want to talk a little bit now about Pride House. So this was modelled after a traditional Olympic hospitality house. It's a place that is welcoming to LGBT athletes, to fans and allies during large-scale international sporting events. Typically, they are places to view the competitions, to experience the event with others, to learn about LGBT sport and homophobia within sport, and a place to kind of build relationships with mainstream sport. Over the past several decades, hospitality houses have become an integral part of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. They're typically organised around nationality and culture. These spaces, and they may be inside or outside of the official athletes' village, provide a base for supporters and athletes to enjoy the event. LGBT people have traditionally been pushed to the margins of sport. So things like negative stereotypes, the threat of real and perceived consequences for living openly, and an exclusionary or hostile culture have made sport quite unwelcoming. The problem isn't just for athletics. So during large-scale international sporting events, there is the possibility to connect with people from different cultures and backgrounds, to learn empathy, and experience diversity, and to share a common appreciation for excellence. When LGBT people are excluded, LGBT culture is also excluded, and Pride houses seek to address this. So there have been some instances where, due to hostile governments or other restrictions, Pride houses have had to take different forms or shapes. So during the 2014 Winter Olympic Games, for example, the request to hold a Pride house in Russia was explicitly denied. So instead, international supporters held remote Pride houses in solidarity with Russian LGBT people, and the Russian LGBT Sport Federation hosted the Open Games. Excuse me. So I think, yeah, taken together, we've got some comments in the chat. I'm loving this chat engagement, by the way. Thank you very much. So this is with respect to the previous slide around barriers. I think kit is a big one in community sport, enabling people to wear something they feel comfortable in, but safety also needs to play a part. So that's a good point. It's finding that balance between something that is kind of fit for purpose, but also allows people to express themselves in a way that makes them feel comfortable. Sponsorship from inclusive companies. This is a very good point. It can be discouraging when companies who are known to be negative have a big presence. Absolutely. Excuse me. We also have a fact sheet for health conditions. Thank you very much for sharing that, Matt. Okay, so now I'd like us to think a little bit about what we can do to support LGBT participants within your organisation. I have to go to another meeting. Look forward to catching up on the rest of your recording. Thank you very much for letting me know, Linny. I hope you've enjoyed the session. I'm wondering if at this point it might be a good idea to put people into breakout groups and maybe have them discuss that for kind of 5 to 10 minutes. And then we can all kind of come and feedback in a little while. Charlotte, is that okay from a tech perspective?
Absolutely. I will click create rooms. Hopefully it won't
Yes.
drag you away straight away. It says we are creating your rooms.
Brilliant.
It's whirring. Oh, yep. So I can open the rooms now if that's convenient, Olivia.
That would be fantastic if we do maybe 5 to 7 minutes and then people can come back.
Lovely. Thank you.
Perfect.
I think they're open. It says all participants have been assigned. Looks like everyone's gone. Great. Um, 5 minutes.
Charlotte, do you want to put me in a room as well?
I can. Well, let me see if I can. How do I
Thanks
do
for
that?
all this, by the way. It's been a nightmare without you. So, yeah, thanks for all this.
That's okay. That's fine. I'm just wondering, can you see where it says rooms along the top? Because it gives me an option to join. I'm not sure how to like put you in it though. Or hang on, I
Yeah,
can
yeah,
manage
yeah,
rooms.
Yeah,
Oh,
put
hang
me
on.
in 3 or 4 that've got 4 in them.
So it says you're managing the room.
Oh,
So if you
join.
click
I can
just join,
can
then
join.
that'll be it.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
got
I'll
it.
wait here and I'll
Lovely.
call everyone back at 5 minutes.
Smashing. Thank you.
Says he's on hold. I wonder if he made it in the room or not. I'm doing a little Sudoku because I actually can't work whilst they're talking about LGBT communities. It's like an interesting topic. This is Adrian's webinar. So I'm struggling to do anything else. It started at 11 and it finishes in half an hour. It's been a good one. I like to have more than one thing going on at once. It's just in my brain. I'm not very good at just focusing on one thing. Hi, Olivia. Did it drag you into a room?
It did, and I thought that if I clicked leave, that it would take me
It would
back to the
take you
main
back
room, but no,
here.
it just took me off. Thank you so much for the spontaneous breakout rooms. I was like, time-wise, I
that's
thought it'd be good to
absolutely
get
fine.
people having a bit of a
Yeah,
chat because I've talked at them quite a lot.
No, I think it's I think you're managing it all really well. Engagement's
you.
really high, so I think it's testament to the questions and the prompts and stuff you're giving them.
I'll take that. I will take that. Right, let's get the slides back up. Yeah, I feel like, to be honest, and it's just something for me to kind of bear in mind with the next one. I think maybe just from a timing perspective, doing 2 or 3 breakout sessions might be the one.
Yeah.
Because I did do a lot of talking and they were really engaged, but
Because it's nice for you to have a minute for your brain to rest.
Honestly, yes. How long do we have until they're back? Because I'd love to get a tissue really quick.
So we've got a minute and a half. Is that doable for you?
Yeah, I can 30 seconds and I will be back in the room. Can you see my
I can see, the question slide.
Brilliant. Okay, cool. We can talk through that and then we'll do, brilliant. Oh, it'll be 2 seconds.
No worries. So we've got 20 seconds. I might put like a little announcement in the rooms.
Fab. Oof, it's cold.
Okay, that's been 5 minutes now. So I might just give it 5 seconds and then close the rooms, something like that. Does that sound okay?
Sounds good. I don't know if it does this on Teams, but on Zoom, I think it announces to them that the breakout rooms are going to close. So I should be fine.
It might do. It might do, yeah.
Should be fine.
Okay, it says it's closing and it's wearing around, so I'm going to turn my camera back off.
Fab. Hi, everyone. So I hope you had an opportunity to have a quick reflect on what you can do to support LGBT participants in your organisation. If anyone would like to share, either in the chat or if they want to come off mute, it'd be really good to hear what you came up with. Abby, got your hand up?
Sorry, I'm keen as mustard, aren't I? You can tell my partner's been away for a week and I've got verbal diarrhea, like need to speak to somebody. Adrian just urged me to share a practical example that I just shared in our group about my my netball club that I'm a part of. So we've literally just in the last few days put out a club survey, and which we do every year. And one of the questions that we've asked you is about kit, and asking the question about whether our members would welcome different kit options, inclusive kit options. So at the minute we play in the very short, very tight dresses, and you know, the evolution of my netball and my body over the 30 years that I've played, as you know, my choices have definitely changed. So we've got now the option of playing in a vest and shorts, or a vest and long leggings, or a dress, or a skirt and a top. So there's going to be a whole suite of kit options available to us, and that might change depending on, you know, whether someone's on their cycle, or whether you know, depending on different disabilities and whatnot, and indeed depending on just what a person feels comfortable wearing based on their gender identity. So yeah, so I'm just so proud that we've got to a position where we thought to ask that question.
That is so good to hear, Abby. I really like a couple of things in particular that you said. One was the fact that you've consulted you know, the people around you. I think having that kind of collecting that data almost on what people actually want is really important, because it means that you're addressing like the specific needs of the people around you. And I also think the range of options that you talked about sounds fantastic. And the fact that, you know, they can be used at, you know, for example, like people wear different things at different points in their cycle, or just whatever they feel comfortable with on the day. I think that creates a really kind of healthy and productive environment where people can feel, you know, like they can kind of bring themselves to sport. So I really like that. Thank you so much for sharing. Does anyone else have any thoughts on what you can do within your organisation to support participants? Okay, no problem. Oh, sorry. Got some ideas here for you. So we have talked a little bit about inclusive policies. in a previous slide, but as an example regarding athletes, parental leave policies that recognise same-gender relationships, eligibility policies that are evidence-based relating to trans inclusion is another example. You could have a global mobility policy that covers things like legal and social information, emergency evacuation plans, support for families if that's needed, and access to gender-affirming care. You can also provide opportunities for education. So how would you support your staff or volunteers to understand more about LGBT issues? How do you talk about language? How do you sort of understand pronouns, things like that? Inclusive communications are also very important. So think about who you're representing in your images, thinking about the language you use in any kind of comms or things of like external facing stuff. Is your language gendered? Is it kind of up to date? And what kind of assumptions are you making in some of your language? Inclusive guidance for facilities, kit and coaching. So thinking about how facilities best support LGBTQ people. So these some of the examples I talked about in a previous slide are having baby changing facilities in all gendered toilets, offering gender neutral toilets, kit prioritizing flexibility over formality, guiding coaches in terms of like using gender neutral language to avoid making assumptions, and just to understand more about the barriers that are faced by LGBT people. And the last thing is working with partners. So working with community groups and understanding how best to support within sport. So we're going to talk very quickly about LGBT allyship. So allyship is an active process. It's something that, so a lot of people describe themselves as allies, but allyship is an action rather than a label. It's something that you do. It's a process of ongoing learning about kind of understanding your own biases, recognizing them and taking active steps to correct them and to be less biased. So we've got kind of 6 stages here, six kind of key elements. So the first is to acknowledge your own assumptions, biases and stereotypes about LGBT people and how to address them. We have got, I'm just having a very quick look in the chat. The other thing my community netball does is diversity monitor at the point of registration to the club, so we know who our people are. We do actively use that data to influence change and positive action. I won't go into all of that. I really like that example. So my background is also in data science, so I'm very biased in favour of data, but it's so powerful, and it gives you that benchmark, that starting point through which you can actualize positive change. So I think that's a really good example. My organisation has a great inclusivity and diversity policy and internal group. However, as the only member of the LGBT community, I feel very isolated and so less likely to put things forward. Equally within the sector and network, I definitely feel I act and present myself differently than I did in my previous professional life in a university. I also used to work at a university, so I completely understand the idea of kind of presenting yourself differently in different contexts. I'm sorry to hear that you feel isolated as the only representative of that community. I think that's quite a common experience. Excuse me. So turning back to allyship, I think it's also important to educate yourself by learning from people in the community. So the key thing here is to listen to other people's experiences, not to make assumptions about how it might be for them. You also want to you want to like facilitate a growth mindset. So it's the idea of being open to new knowledge, to kind of new experiences, new perspectives. You also want to educate your colleagues. So if you're someone who So like me, I love doing my kind of own background research on things, sharing that information with other people, because it demonstrates to people from that community that you're actually interested in them and their experiences, and you want to kind of disseminate that knowledge. The fourth kind of pillar is to build LGBT inclusion and visibility into your year-round events. So a lot of the time, organizations will do a lot for Pride Month, but that's kind of it. And you want it to be much more ingrained, much more consistent. You know, you want to have like the policies which support LGBT individuals in place as well. So the LGBT inclusion is kind of front and center at all times. You also want to recognise intersectionality, and I've talked about this quite a lot, so I won't go into too much detail here, but just acknowledging that people aren't just, you know, gay or cis or trans. There are a whole bunch of other different things, and that impacts the way they're going to be treated. And the final thing is ensuring that the experiences and voices of the community are factored into the design of products and services. So, for example, the kits we were talking about earlier, toilets and baby changing facilities, those kinds of things. And now we're going to look at a case study of Rugby Football League, who are doing LGBT inclusion quite well. So over a period of 3 years, Rugby Football League undertook quite an extensive program of work with the focus of kind of LGBT inclusion. This included the following: so gaining insight through a designated action research program called Perceptions and Experiences of Rugby League LGBTQ Young People. They consulted with a range of LGBT-focused organisations on the development of a Tackle Homophobia guide for clubs. They also consulted with several trans individuals and organisations in order to develop an inclusive trans policy. There were they held 2 Equality University conferences, which included LGBTQ input and subsequent action to increase LGBTQ participation, such as mandatory training for all staff. Several professional clubs held designated games to raise awareness of the Tackle It campaign and LGBT inclusion. They were present at a range of Pride events. They supported the establishment of an LGBT rugby league and the development of a range of LGBT inclusion education resources. They provided support for a trans coach to gain a level 2 coaching qualification. And they tackled homophobic language and behaviour by players with robust fines and bans. So we're almost at the end of the session. So we're very quickly again going to go into some breakout rooms for maybe 5 minutes. And if we could reflect on 2 things. First is, what is your key learning in the session? If there's anything that's particularly stuck out to you, maybe something you didn't know before or something you think is quite powerful. And secondly, how will you apply this learning in the workplace? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to reflect on that, and then we'll come back and share some of our ideas.
Adrian, are you doing a survey at all for this webinar?
No, I just thought about that as I was involved in it. So no, I think we'll have to do a post survey actually.
Hey, Olivia, I was just asking Adrian whether there was a survey, and there's not, so that's fine. I was going to suggest putting the link in the breakout rooms, but that's no problem.
I could put something in the chat actually.
Is there
just to get there? Yeah.
But do you have a
Charlotte?
survey created to send them?
No, but I was just thinking about more of a kind of a, you know, general reactions type of thing.
Okay.
We can do the official one later. I'll do that towards the end. Are you, after this, we get some feedback, Olivia? Are you going to be wrapping up then? So it's near the end.
Sorry, I realise I've been on mute this whole time and I have actually been talking. So I don't have a survey to hand. What I was thinking of doing was posting the link to the sign up form for the next webinar in the chat. So at the end of the deck, I'm just going to say, oh, our next webinar is on inclusive uniforms and kit. Here's how you sign up. Here's what it is, etc. But yeah, I don't have a survey from my side.
Okay. Well, let's forget that. I think verbally, you could say, okay, yeah. Oh, verbally, you could just ask people to put it in the chat. You know, any reflections on today, in terms of you know, value and format, if you like. But then I'll follow up with an official survey.
Okay, brilliant. If you're happy to share, you know, anonymously the feedback that you get, that would be very helpful to me, but absolutely not a deal breaker. I'll still come back for the other webinars.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah,
fabulous. Excuse me.
And if you don't mind just staying on at the end just for a couple of minutes, we can have a little debrief.
Yeah, of course, no problem at all.
I've just popped a message in there to say they've got a minute left. I'll probably bring them back in a minute.
No problem. Very appreciative of your tech help, Charlotte.
Oh, that's absolutely fine. It's quite fitting that the next one's about kit, because that really has been like a key area of what people have been speaking about today. So very good.
Does flow nicely. I think
definitely
was it you, Adrian, or Kerry who chose the order? Because I think there's definitely a logical consistency to this order.
Yeah, it was Kerry, nothing to do with me, and she kind of linked it into some of the you know, inclusive campaigns.
I'm going to call them back now, just so you know.
Fab.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good order. Says we're moving people back to the main room, so that probably gives them a few seconds, like you said, Olivia, a few seconds to come back.
No problem. You can see people coming back in now.
I'm not sure if people have been lost in the abyss, but
yeah, I'm not seeing many people coming back. I think there might be either a 30-second or a minute delay. I think it gives people a heads up. Yeah, how odd. Oh no, I think people are coming back now.
Oh, there we are.
There we
Perfect.
go. The joys of technology. Hi everyone, welcome back. So we've only got a couple of minutes left, so it would be great to hear your thoughts on either of these questions. So what is your key learning from this session, and how will you apply this learning in the workplace? Again, you're welcome to put this in the chat, or if you feel comfortable. Oh, FYI, I was in a room alone and then got chucked out completely. I'm so sorry that happened. I'm not entirely sure why that happened, but I will make sure that doesn't happen again in future sessions. We have a hand up. I can't see whose name has a hand up, but we do have a hand up.
Hi, it's Hunter.
Hello.
We were chatting in our room, and as an organisation, we've worked really closely with kind of a local organisation that is all of, you know, their specific aim is bringing together people within the LGBTQ plus society locally, and they've done kind of specific sports sessions in the past, and due to different circumstances, you know, they've kind of stopped happening. But actually they've moved their focus into running like a lot of like social groups and social events. So, you know, we're now going to sort of start to talk to them about, you know, how can we just build in the place for activity within those social sessions. So actually, if it is a Friday night social, you know, how, you know, can you bring people in to like get people up and dancing with like a silent disco, you know, rather than necessarily it being like a specific sports session.
I think that's a really nice idea. I think having that kind of social interaction element is so important. You know, people are very social creatures. So giving people the kind of space and the platform to talk in a way that's a little bit more informal as well. That's really great. So thank you so much for sharing. Did anyone else have any other thoughts or reflections? Nope. In that case, we have reached the end of the session. You can have a few minutes back of your day. Just wanted to big up our podcast in case you wanted to hear more about stories within diversity and inclusion. It is a good podcast. I would recommend it. Just here is some further reading and resources. Oh, we've got someone in the chat. Things are changing, which is great. The football sector is key and has taken a long time to show acceptance. Thus, not many players being out, but finally this looks like it might be changing. Terrifying stats about countries where it's still illegal to be part of the community. That's a very good point. Thank you for sharing that. Excuse me. So finally, the next webinar in the series will be building on a lot of what we've talked about in this webinar around inclusive uniforms and kit. So it'll be on the 15th of July, same time, 11 o'clock until 12:30. So we need to think about every aspect to ensure that sport and physical activity is inclusive. A huge part of this is what we wear when we get active. It's often poorly thought out, and stereotypes around kit hinder participation. In this webinar, we will explore the different ways that kit can impact on participation and provide tips on how to ensure kit can be inclusive. So we have, I believe, in the chat, the link to register for the event. Brilliant. Thank you, Charlotte. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. Your feedback has been, you've been really engaged. I've really enjoyed hearing from you about the kind of things you're doing to foster an inclusive environment for LGBT individuals within your organisations. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar next month.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks a lot to Olivia and Charlotte for all the tech. We haven't got a survey. I can see people are leaving anyway, so I'll be sending that out with the slides and the recording. So yeah, I hope you got some great value out of that. Thanks for sharing all your experiences as well. That's as much part of it, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you at the next one. Thanks, everyone.